Good evening. Thank you very, very much for coming tonight. Welcome to the second session of Parent University. And today we have a very, very special topic. I was actually talking to Tom, who is here, he's a foster grandparent at Hall School. And I was telling him about, he was commenting that I want to be here because Hall School is talking about growth mindset. Everything is about mindset. I want to understand it. So this is a big topic right now in the academic world. And I heard also that it is a big topic in Palo Alto. All of the tech people are so obsessed, that's the adjective that I heard, obsessed about growth mindset. Maybe because Dr. Dweck, is that how you pronounce his name? Her name, also is from Stanford. So she was the one who coined the term growth mindset. And Dr. Paul Dexter, who is our speaker today, is going to talk about that. So let me introduce my friend and colleague, and actually my best buddy when I was doing my doctoral work. So we were classmates in our doctoral program at USM. So I know Paul, and he's a great speaker, very organized, and very thorough. So you will enjoy his presentation. So Paul Dexter was awarded his PhD in public policy from USM's Muskie School of Public Service in 2015. Paul is a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Maine, with a background in community mental health and substance abuse prevention. He is certified as a Myers-Briggs Type Indicator practitioner and is a certified global career development facilitator. Dr. Dexter currently serves as the Director of Academic Retention Initiatives at USM. He has designed and taught exploratory courses such as Choices, Changes in Careers, Academic Self-Management, and College and Career Success, all with a primary audience of at-risk first-year college students. Outside of the university, Paul has also served on the board of the Maine College Circle, an organization aiming to raise college aspirations of rural and low-income children, and is currently a board member and chair of the Grants Committee for Foundation 51, a nonprofit supporting initiative practices among educators in the MSAD 51 school district, that is Cumberland North Yarmouth district. And Cumberland North Yarmouth also has a parent university, according to Paul. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Paul Dexter.
Thank you, Grace. Is this mic work? Can everyone hear me back there? Excellent. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. More than anything, I want to say how much I appreciate everyone coming out tonight. We have, after our snowstorm, a room filled with parents and educators who have already had a very full day, I imagine, and you're making the time for this. So I'd like to make this as very practical as possible so that it's not just about understanding growth mindset, it's also about strategies for growing that growth mindset. When I talk about this, I'm really wearing two hats. I'm wearing the hat of a parent, and I'm wearing the hat of an educator. I have two daughters, a 17-year-old who's a junior in high school, and an 8th grader who is wrapping up her middle school experience, and next year will be in high school. Both are very good students. Both have very different personalities and very different interests and pursuits. It's interesting to watch their experience, though, through the lens of mindset. Because my older daughter, who excels in virtually every subject, in her freshman year, took an introductory science course, and as part of that course, there was a little bit of chemistry. It didn't go well. Keep in mind, this wasn't a full chemistry course. It was the chemistry unit. The result of that experience, back then, her freshman year, and still as a junior, is her assertion that she cannot do chemistry. Now, on the flip side, I have an artistic daughter whose life goal, and I kid you not, is to be famous. I don't know if anyone can relate. Their goal is to be famous. And she used an Amazon gift card to buy herself a light blue ukulele. Decided to teach herself ukulele so she could sing the songs that she enjoyed. And I am grateful that she did not anticipate being Taylor Swift immediately. She is putting in the time every single night. Trust me, every single night. With her door closed, strumming the ukulele and playing songs, knowing that it takes hard work. They each bring a different perspective to those tasks and to themselves. So tonight, what I'd like to do together is I'd like to talk about the power of growth mindset. I'd like to make sure that we have a brief overview of how learning actually works. After that, I want to talk about ways to create an environment that is conducive to learning, that will encourage learning to happen, followed by some examples of active learning strategies and therefore effective learning strategies, and then tips for creating positive learning environments at home. So again, very action-oriented. That's what I hope your takeaways will be this evening. So thinking about mindset and thinking about the two examples I gave with my daughters, why is it that some people keep moving forward when faced with a challenge and others give up? As Grace noted, Dr. Carol Dweck became very well known out of Stanford when, based upon her research, she saw patterns and coined the terms mindset, growth mindset, and fixed mindset, and wrote the book titled, oh look, Mindset. It was written in 2006 and yet still has huge impacts upon how we view the human response to challenge. And that is not just for kids who are in school, that is for employees, that is for anyone who needs to learn something new. So let's talk for a minute about what is fixed mindset. Fixed mindset, as you can see by the lock, comes from the belief that you are who you are. It is set in stone. You cannot change, which means the intelligence that you have will never change. Your personality is set. Your creativity, you either have it or you don't. The belief that when it comes to talent, you either have it or you don't. And that's what the person really internalizes and thinks about themselves. I'm either really great at something or I'm not. I can either understand something or I can't, like chemistry. The growth mindset, in contrast, the idea of the growth mindset is that people can and will change with effort. And effort is the key. So regardless of the starting point, regardless of the level of aptitude, the amount of perhaps natural initial talent someone may or may not have, regardless of whether somebody actually has an interest in the topic or the skill or what their initial temperament is, with effort, the growth mindset says, I can change. And it's through application, effort, and experience. If we put these side by side, the fixed mindset, the belief is, we are who we are and I cannot change. As opposed to, anyone can change with enough effort. The belief in the fixed mindset that when an unwanted outcome happens, it's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. For example, I didn't do well on that test because the teacher didn't prepare me. I didn't do well in that game because the coach put me in when he or she shouldn't have. Blaming other for unwanted outcomes. Somebody with a growth mindset owns those outcomes. I didn't do well on the exam because I didn't put enough effort into understanding the material. I didn't do well enough on the field because I haven't had enough time with those new set of plays that we do. There's the contrast. Somebody with a fixed mindset tends to focus on what they have done. In other words, what they already know they were successful at. Somebody with a growth mindset focuses on what they have the opportunity to do in the future. In other words, challenges to overcome, ways to develop new skills, new understanding. The person with a fixed mindset puts their effort to prove that they have a certain capacity, a certain personality, a certain talent, to again and again show that this is who I am. The person with the growth mindset aims to improve. It's always about trying to take it to the next step, to get better, and understanding that there's effort that goes with trying to get better. The fixed mindset praises talent and ability, the idea that you either have it or you don't. So you might see a very good basketball player, and they believe they're good because they have the talent, as opposed to the work they put in, the effort they put in, to get to the point of being as good as they are. Often the person with a fixed mindset will try to avoid situations where they're going to fail. They don't want to fail, and if they don't believe they can do something, they will avoid it. That can be anything. That can be a skill, a behavior, explaining a concept. They will avoid it. The person with the growth mindset knows that they can learn from failure. Not only do they not avoid it, but they embrace it, and they take time to reflect on it. So if one of these folks has a failure or makes an error, the response, based upon their mindset, tends to be very different. The person with the mindset of you either have it or you don't, you either can or you cannot. If they experience an error, they will run from it. What do I mean by that? For example, if they try a sport and they don't do well the first time, they quit the team. If they are taking a class and they don't do well on the first quiz, their first impulse is to drop that class, running from the failure. The growth mindset, the person takes time to process the error. What is it that I did that led to this? Or what is it that I haven't done yet that will allow me to be successful? So they process the error, they take time to reflect upon it and learn from it. If somebody who has a fixed mindset fails, often the natural response is to try to make themselves feel better by finding someone else who did worse. So I got a C- on the exam, but John, you got a D. That makes me feel better, as opposed to what is it that I could have done to get a better grade. As opposed to the person with the growth mindset who tries actively to learn from and then correct that error. They don't do well in the exam, they go meet with a teacher, they form a study group, they practice explaining concepts to their friend or their family. If somebody with a fixed mindset fails, they try to avoid those situations or activities in the future because failure for them is a significant blow. Somebody with a growth mindset embraces that opportunity to do better next time. I'm going to try harder, I'm going to figure out what I need to do differently, and I'm going to put in the time that's associated with being successful. So hopefully you can hear that so much of this comes down to the perception of the person, the belief of the person. They can each experience the very same thing, but the belief about their own role and their ability can be dependent upon their mindset, and this can be a big predictor of whether or not they're going to succeed. One of the things that Dweck talked about is the shift from a now perspective to a not yet perspective. The now to the not yet. The fixed mindset tends to be more about the now. Because if I'm not good at X, whatever X is, if I'm not good at baseball right now, I don't believe I ever will be. If I'm not good at picking up a new language now or playing an instrument now, then I never will be. That is the now framework. What Dweck encouraged is the not yet framework. That if I am not good at X, I might not be good now, but it's really about not yet. I can be good. I can do well. I can learn this. I can perform at a higher level. So this is a challenge for me to overcome. Because of the now focus, for somebody with a fixed mindset, they tend to be focused on immediate results. Immediate results. Was I able to do it or not, succeed or not? And the results to them is an indicator of whether they have that inborn ability or not. Because remember, somebody with a fixed mindset believes that you either have the ability or you don't. You have the talent or you don't. So the initial results, the now results for somebody with a fixed mindset is, if I didn't do it now, it means I must not be able to. Somebody with a growth mindset, it's much more progress focused. The idea is that it's not about getting it right the first time, and it's not about getting it right now. It's about the not yet, making improvement over time, because I believe that eventually I can do it and I will do it, just not yet. And it might seem like a small shift in language and perspective, but it can be the difference of whether or not somebody decides they're going to try something again, or they're going to put in the effort or not. Because that effort, the trying harder, the going back when we failed the first time, or failed the second time, that effort is actually resulting in the brain making new connections. So for example, every memory that we have, your memory of getting from your home to here tonight, is a neural pathway. Every time somebody successfully throws the ball from the pitcher's mound to the glove of the catcher, it's a neural pathway that they have developed over time. So it's the effort that creates the memory, the effort that creates the connection, and we become stronger learners and performers as a result of that effort. So literally the brain gets smarter through repetitive effort. And we're going to be talking about what sort of effort tends to result in actual learning, because not all effort results in learning. I did want to point out how I think there's a big connection between the growth mindset and emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is also a concept that came out almost around the time that the idea of mindset came about. And back then it came out of the field of positive psychology, the idea that our emotional intelligence is as important as our traditional intelligence. And at first it didn't catch on. These days, you are not able to read any major publication from any major discipline in the world of work where there isn't an article about the importance of emotional intelligence. It goes far beyond being able to manage emotions or feelings. It goes far beyond being able to just identify what I'm feeling and why I'm reacting a certain way. It involves a high level of self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, and empathy. These are capacities that help us succeed in life. It's not just helping us succeed as learners. And some of the research indicates this is a greater predictor. Our emotional intelligence is a greater predictor than how smart somebody is. And fostering a growth mindset, which we'll continue to talk about, creates real opportunities to build our emotional intelligence. Now let's look at some of the most critical components of emotional intelligence and how it relates to this conversation tonight. So some key components of EI, emotional intelligence. Persisting in the face of frustration. Think about what we've already talked about. What is the learner's response when they don't understand it the first time? What is the learner's response when they need to try harder than they believe they should? What is their response when they go to that first practice and don't do as well as their peers? The ability to go back at it and move forward when we come up against an obstacle is one of the biggest, most influential aspects of emotional intelligence. Controlling impulses and delaying gratification. The idea of, I have homework to do, but my Xbox is right there. Or I have projects to do at work, but I also could just jump on the computer and spend the afternoon responding to emails. Delaying gratification, controlling the impulses. Those are big predictors of strong emotional intelligence. The ability to self-motivate. I'll share another personal story. My wife is a high school English teacher. She does lots and lots and lots of grading of papers, giving feedback. Now, for her, in order to be in the frame of mind to give feedback to her students, everything has to be just right. In other words, she can't just open her computer, read a paper, and give feedback. It needs to be a certain time of day. It needs to be at Starbucks in Falmouth. And there need to be a certain number of things that get done before she goes so she can feel okay about spending that time on grading. For me, I have what she said is the ability to flip the switch and do whatever I need to do, which was a big survival mechanism in that doctoral program that Grace and I were in, because just because you don't want to get up and write a paper at 5 in the morning doesn't mean that that isn't the time you need to do it. The ability to self-motivate, even if we don't want to do something, that capacity, the more we can build that, the greater the likelihood we're going to be successful. And having the capacity to hope. When circumstances are difficult, whether it be a relationship that I'm in, a class that I'm taking, I'm in the middle of the season and I'm performing, or my team is performing poorly, the ability to hope and hang on to that hope as part of the determination to keep moving forward is another part of emotional intelligence. Now, think about these and as they relate to studying, as they relate to academic time on task, and how that can be experienced very differently than this. What we're going to do is talk about the idea of learning, how motivation plays in, and how we can use very specific approaches to keep the motivation level high and to see the gains as they're happening. So first, let me ask this question of you. What do you think is the difference between studying and learning? When you hear those two words, what are some differences? Studying and learning.
Studying is memorizing and learning is perhaps experiencing something.
Okay. Memorizing versus experiencing. What else? Go ahead.
Studying doesn't describe a result, whereas learning kind of does.
Okay. So studying isn't necessarily results-oriented. Learning is. All right. One more. Studying versus learning. What do you think?
Kind of mirroring the first one. Studying is more facts or assimilating facts, and maybe learning is more of an embodied experience where your whole self is there.
Your whole self is there. Okay, so memorizing facts versus what I hear you saying is making meaning of it by putting your whole self into it.
Right.
Okay, great, great. I want you to think about what mode your student has been in. What mode your learner has been in. Studying or learning. There's a reason why the word dying is in studying. I want to ask how many of your learners, when it's time to go study, say, I am so excited. You know what I'm going to do right now? I'm going to go study. Anybody? No. Is it more like this? I have to go study. And the head goes down, grab the book bag off the chair, they go and plop it down, and they get ready to study. Yes? Can we relate? Sure. So let me ask you a related question. For which do you think your learner would work harder? If the task that was given to them is to try to get an A on the exam, or if the task that they were given is to teach a review session of the information to some of the other students in the class so they can perform well. How many of you think that your learners would work harder for A by a show of hands? Okay, I see a few. How many do you think would work harder for B? Okay, a few more. Okay, so for those of you who said B, why is that? Why do you think they'd work harder for B if that was the task? Go ahead.
Social pressure.
Social pressure. Sure. Social pressure. Why else? Please.
You could work really hard to get an A and still not get the A, so
Absolutely.
don't bother.
Absolutely. You can work very hard for that first one and still not make it happen. One more. Why B and not A?
Perhaps in B, you're going to get a lot more attention from your peers.
Okay? So I could get more attention from my peers. I have asked this question of hundreds of students in a variety of settings. And when I ask for which you would work harder, and this is, I don't ask about growth mindset, I don't talk to them about response. Very early on in the conversation, I say, for which one of these would you work harder? By far, the majority of learners say they would work harder for B. And part of why, you've already mentioned, there's the social piece, there's social pressure. They say, well, if you were going to explain concepts, you need to know what you're talking about. And there's also a sense of responsibility. I wouldn't want to let them down. And that's when I tell the learner the good news. The good news being that if you approach your learning as if the task was going to be teaching others, the likelihood of you doing well goes up dramatically. And I'm going to show you how to show your learners how to do that. Most students, I would say, are not taught how to learn. How many folks here, when you were in high school, if you went to college, were actually shown how to learn? Anybody? I wasn't. I remember doing well in high school, going to college, and using the same approaches that I used in high school. I didn't get the same results, but it worked well enough. At no point did anyone say to me, you can put in the same amount of effort, maybe even less, and get far more out of it. Because the reality is, just like anyone can change in terms of growth mindset, anyone can become an expert learner with just a few changes. This is a very basic model of how learning actually works and how we make meaning. I still find that it's one of the easiest to understand. Really what I want to point out here is that we're exposed to information all day long. And if we aren't paying attention to it, that is the first area in which learning doesn't happen, because if we're not paying attention, we're not going to learn. I'm going to be talking in a minute about attention. Working memory is when we're doing something with the information, and I'm going to be placing a great deal of emphasis upon that this evening, doing something with the information. And the long-term memory is something that I mentioned already this evening. You might not have seen the idea of driving from where you live to here repeatedly as something that was practice. It was. You might not have thought about when you have the car radio on and you're singing your favorite song, and eventually you know all the words. That's practice. That's taking working memory and rehearsing it so that you're able to get to it in the future. That's how memory works. Now it starts with our learning environment. Keeping in mind, our learning environment is anywhere where new information is coming in, where I need to understand or I need to remember. So if I'm a learner and I'm in a formal classroom, I always say, if you can, sit up front. I joked with some of the folks who arrived early that many of them were acting like my students. They filled the back of the room and then slowly up to the front. And I know this is true when I see it with students of all ages if they don't have assigned seats, because I'll be in the room and eventually the room's almost full. There's one empty seat right there. And that student walks into the room, they see it, and they say, oh. And up they come, and they sit down. They don't want to be right up front. What might be some reasons why, from a managing the learning environment standpoint, sitting up front can help the student or the learner succeed? What do you think? Say it again?
Less distraction.
Less distraction, sure. So if I'm sitting here instead of sitting back there, I don't see when people have their phones out, or their laptop open, or they're eating something, or they're doing something else that's not what we're doing in class. What's another reason, sitting up front?
Focus on the teacher.
Yes, focus on the teacher. So there's nothing between the learner and the person at the front of the room. Excellent. Any other reasons?
Can hear.
Yes, if you're at the front of the room, you can hear and see much better. There's no barrier between you and where the learning is taking place. The other piece that I've had people respond when I ask that question is, if I'm sitting up front, I feel like there's some pressure to pay attention. Some positive accountability. That if I'm sitting up front, I am far less likely to write a note to send back to you, or to take out my phone and send a text. I'm not saying it never happens, I've seen it, but they are less likely if there's some positive accountability. Out of class, finding the place or places for the time on task. That's what my wife has to do. The idea of I'm just going to be at the kitchen table, for her, doesn't work because of distractions. Also, our brain builds in lots of cues and associations even when we don't want it to. So whenever somebody says to me, when I ask the question, where do you do your learning when you're outside of the classroom? And they say, I do it in my room. I cringe. And the reason why I cringe is because of all the other things that learner does in that room. And if any of those things give the learner pleasure, the brain wants to remember that. So for example, if my Xbox or my PlayStation is in my room and I am playing that, the brain says That was awesome. I want to remember that. So, okay, so it's set up over there, and when we pull it out this far from the TV, that means I'm going to get to play that game. This is great. Or, what else is in my room? My bed. And does sleeping give us pleasure? Oh, yeah. And so the brain says, oh, that place right over there, I could catch a nap. Or if that's where I hang out with my friends, or watch YouTube, or play my music. So it builds in these cues that says to the brain, you can get some pleasure. So then I grab my backpack, I go into my room to study, and I put it down, and my brain says to me, you know what else you could be doing right now? You could be playing Xbox. You could be taking a nap. You could be hanging out with your friends. You could be playing your music. So a key piece is, where am I going to do that learning time on task outside of the classroom where I don't have those cues? Sean, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, real quick. The problem with laptops, of course, is you can study do all your assignments for your classes.
Yes.
It's the same exact place you're going to play the games.
Exactly. And I'm going to mention that briefly too. That's an excellent point. In this day and age, there's so many cues built in to the same devices and the same places. That poses a great challenge. I think that it relates to this though. Only have what you need for that task. And one of the things I see learners do when they say, I'm going to go study, is they bring their entire backpack, which for some reason has gotten bigger over the years. I am amazed at how much my daughters carry around in that backpack. Reams of books and notebooks and calculators, and so they bring the whole thing and put it there, and let's say they only have an hour. There's no way all of that can be done in an hour. And that can be a bit distracting, overwhelming, frustrating. Only bring into your learning space what you're going to need for that learning task. If it's history, you bring your history textbook, your history notebook, and anything else associated with that class. And that's it. The challenge with the laptop, if I'm using that in order to do my academic time on task, is there are lots of other cues built in. So at least initially, it's important for the learner to ask, do I even need this laptop? If I do, only turn on the application that's used for that assignment. Now that includes some delayed gratification, right? That we talked about earlier. To not, well, I'm just going to open up Instagram down here, and every now and then see if something pops up. Or I'm going to put on Netflix and have that streaming while I am paying attention. And we're about to get to the idea of attention. So only have what you need for that task. Remove any distractions that you can. This, by the way, is one of the roles that you can help your learner play, is identify potential distractions. I know at home, I'm a distraction. I know that when either of my kids are doing their homework, unless they want me to be the audience, which I'm going to talk about in a little while, I need to not go into that room. I need to not, because the minute I open the door, they figure, Dad's going to give me a chore to do. Most of the time, they're right. You left your dishes downstairs. You need to go feed the dog. But I know when they're doing their time on task, something that I can do is not distract them, but also point out to them what some of the distractions might be. Another piece is, we talked about the cues and avoiding certain cues. The learner can also build in cues. So I had a student ask me the other day, what about the idea of playing music when I'm studying? And I said, I think that's fine if you only associate that music with your academic time on task. I know for me, it's the entire Lord of the Rings soundtrack. So I put that on, and it's like flicking a switch. And that's when I do my deep thinking, that's when I write my reports, that's when I did my dissertation. It was to Lord of the Rings. And so what I say to somebody who says, well, what about, can I have this on? If you know what's coming, if it's not new music, it can become the soundtrack of your learning, and it can build in a cue that says it's time to focus. But the idea of putting on random music or streaming a show in the background that I have never seen, that is a distraction. Okay? The problem is now I get stressed out whenever I hear Lord of the Rings music because I think I should be writing anyway. So the idea of attention, the science is very clear. Minds Online, Teaching Effectively with Technology, I pulled out these key points. So first of all, our attention is limited. We only have a certain amount of it, a certain amount of mental bandwidth. And so we have to be very mindful of where we put our attention. And paying attention involves holding irrelevant information at bay, keeping distractions away, things that I might want to listen to, I might want to respond to. I need to keep those out of my learning environment because the attention is limited. The brain is wired to respond to stimuli. External stimuli, loud noises, unexpected noises, which again, one of the reasons why don't put on a show that I haven't seen, because much of what's going to happen on that show is unexpected. And the different stimuli, the noises and the sights, they're going to draw my attention away from what I'm doing. When I showed that earlier diagram of how learning works, you might recall the very first thing was attention. That very first thing. And in the absence of focused attention, we actually remember and learn very little. That for many learners, they believe as long as they're in the room, they're somehow taking it in and learning. And that's not how the brain works. So full attention, and I'm going to be talking more about that, is what needs to happen if the learning is going to start taking place. And our emotional state and self-talk, in and of themselves, can drain off our resources, including if we have a fixed mindset. The belief that I can't do this. There's no way I'm going to be able to do these math problems, for example. There's no way I'm going to learn this language. That in and of itself can drain off what we need in order to pay full attention. Now in our society, the word multitasking comes up quite a bit. And there are even employers that ask in an interview, tell me about your ability to multitask. Now I can tell you with my career development hat on, which I have worn at the university, what the employer is not saying is, tell me about your ability to fully pay attention to two things at once. What they're really asking is, talk to me about your ability to look at a list of things you need to do and figure out how to prioritize. And yet we've gotten to the point in our society where we don't necessarily flinch or blink when somebody is trying to do two things at once. And for the purposes of learning and attention, multitasking is defined as trying to do two cognitive tasks simultaneously. What I'm not talking about is on a Saturday when I'm trying to get a lot done, and I've got a load of laundry going, and then I go out to mow the lawn, and I time it so that when I finish the lawn, I can put the next load in. That's multitasking, but those aren't cognitive tasks. Cognitive tasks are things like being in a class where I'm trying to learn complex concepts and I'm checking my email or I'm texting to somebody. If I'm at the dinner table and we're having a family conversation, I'm texting somebody. I'm in the middle of writing a paper, working on a report, and I decide to take that phone call. I didn't shut off my phone or I didn't forward my phone. I take the phone call. Let me ask you all a related question. Has anyone here ever tried to have a conversation with someone while texting or emailing? What happens? What happens?
You go with one or the other. You can't do both.
You end up going with one or the other. You cannot do both. You start sometimes typing what you're saying or saying what you're typing. And I learned the hard way. If it's 5:15, I'm still at my office, and I have one of those headsets because often when I'm on the phone, I have to go to a website or type. And if my wife calls me to say, "Hi, when are you coming home?" And I said, well, I want to wrap up this one thing first, and then starts talking to me about something else. And I'm trying to finish that last email, and then I realize she has stopped talking because she realizes I am not paying attention. I don't do that anymore. I learned. But there's this belief that we can attend to 2 cognitive tasks at once. And people say, well, you know, if I'm in a staff meeting at my school and I'm checking email, I'm paying attention to both, right? Or if I just take that phone call, I'm still here. It's not how the brain works. There are a number of different examples of very simple tests and tasks that somebody can try and try to do 2 things at once, and they fail epically. And yet they believe that when I am studying for history, I also can be doing something else. When I am at a family gathering, that I can take out my phone and I'm still hearing your whole story, right? I'm hearing it, but I'm also getting to text my friends. That's not how the brain works. The brain works by single tasking. So what happens is, when I'm trying to do 2 cognitive things at once, it's not that I'm fully paying attention to both, it's that the brain is trying to rapidly shift attention between them. And what studies have shown is that in this rapid shifting of attention, something is always lost. Something is always lost. And it ends up being a big waste of time for the person involved. And often they fooled themselves to believe, oh, I've got it, I was there. And then if you're asked, okay, well, explain to me the concept, they realize there are some gaps. The other piece is, has anyone done this? And I mentioned earlier, let's say you're writing a report, or you're really interested in what a speaker is talking about. You're really in the zone of thinking about it, contemplating, and then you take a phone call or you answer a text. Does that happen to anybody? We all have very busy lives. Yeah. There's a no judgment zone here if you did. We've all done it. But what happens is, if we were in that deep thought and we briefly shifted our attention, it pulls us out of that deep thinking, and it will take us at least 20 minutes to get back to that deep level of thought, and that's if we don't do it again. If you're ever working on a report or trying to put together a presentation and you're not single tasking, it takes a lot longer, doesn't it? And then you might go back and go through your PowerPoint or whatever Google Slides you're using, and you say, you know, this doesn't fit together, there's something missing. Because you've gone in and out of attending to it as opposed to really treating it as deep work. And yet so many of us, in our work environments, our learning environments, this is right there. And I'm a big user, I am. But I also know when not to have this out because of what it does to the thinking and learning process. So speaking of deep work, Cal Newport is a computer science faculty at MIT. And he ended up writing more books, doing more research, teaching more courses than several professors combined in the same amount of time. And people didn't know how he did it. And so he wrote a book. Well, this is how I did it. And so much of it has to do with single tasking and attention. So one of the things is that because we have this, it tends to provide us with a flight from boredom. That's how he describes it. So I am sitting in class, and Mr. Wallace is teaching. Teacher?
Teaching.
Okay. Mr. Wallace is teaching, but that doesn't give me as much pleasure in the moment as hopping on and doing some Snapchatting or playing a game. I perceive this class of Mr. Wallace as being bored. So I get to run from the boredom in the moment and jump on and do something that gives me a little pleasure. And in that moment, I am robbing myself of the opportunity to learn and to make connections. But I don't think that way. I think, well, I went to class and I got to do these things. Isn't that awesome? But the reality is I didn't, right? And we see this in our society, the flight from boredom. It used to be when we're standing in line at the grocery store and we're waiting, we would talk to the people around us. We would think about our day. Maybe we'd have an aha moment. The next time you're in line at the grocery store, I challenge you to look around and see how many people have this out. It's a flight from boredom. But that's not all. That can get in the way of deep work. This idea of jumping from one thing to another over time, where I'm on my phone, then I'm on my computer, then I'm with my friends, and how often am I with my friends, but I'm not really with my friends? I'm there, but I'm Snapchatting somebody who's not there. And I'm jumping on and doing something else, and then I'm watching some of the movie, and then I'm doing something else. What the research has shown is it can create this state of fragmented attention, where it gets harder and harder to actually pay attention to one thing at a time. To sit down and read a chapter of a book. To listen to an entire lecture that my teacher recorded without getting distracted, without fleeing from what I perceive to be as boredom. So it lowers the brain's ability over time to actually concentrate and to contemplate. Because learning involves thinking of how does this relate to my life? How does this relate to something that I learned 2 weeks ago? How might this be important to something that I want to be able to do or experience? That's contemplation. And creating a state of fragmented attention reduces the brain's ability to even think that way. Another that I think we can all relate to, that Dr. Newport speaks about, is attention residue. You are all very busy people. I know that. You made the time to be here. Many of you might have been running from one thing, and after this, you have something else immediately. And during the day, you might also have that. One errand after another, one conversation after another, one project after another, one meeting after another. And what Professor Newport says is that attention residue is when I just left the staff meeting, I walk into the class I'm supposed to teach, and part of my brain is back at that staff meeting trying to process it. And I have something immediately after this class, and part of my brain is trying to pay attention to that, where I'm not fully present. So part of what I always encourage is to the best of our ability is to not schedule literally back to back to back. At the university, I'm trying to, any of the meetings I'm involved with, I'm trying to have, instead of hour-long meetings, 45 minutes. And then 15 minutes to be able to process, reflect a bit, take a deep breath, and then shift to thinking about what I'm doing next, so that this attention residue doesn't get in the way of my work and my learning task. So this idea of single tasking for learning. One of the approaches to helping do that is a brain dump. So the 15 minutes I just mentioned, right before I go to my next class or right before I sit down, if it's one of our kids, before they sit down to do homework, is get out anything that you're thinking about right now. Say it, write it out, type it out, whatever it is. Do a brain dump. Get it out of the way so that you can focus on the one thing that you need to be doing with your time right now. Okay? It's important to have a clear goal for the time on task. I mentioned earlier that if I just have to work on history, then I only have my history book, I have my history notebook, anything else for history. However, it's not just I have to study history. What is it I need to do with that half hour? And be very specific. I have a quiz 2 days from now, so in this half hour, I'm going to practice explaining some of the concepts associated with that. I'm just going to spend half an hour doing that. Or I have a math test coming up. So I'm going to use half an hour, this half an hour, to only have the math there and do some practice with the math. So be very specific of what I'm doing with that time. Get the devices away for the reasons that we already talked about. and only, if I am using a device, only open the apps that I need. This doesn't just affect students. There are more professionals than I can count that have difficulty not keeping apps open when they're at work. And you can actually download a software to block out any social media or any news sites if you have a challenge doing that. Because we tend to train ourselves when it comes to attention. And it's not just about when we're in school. It's about when we're with other people, and it's about when we are in the work environment. I said earlier that it's not just about it being exposed to the information, it's working the information, doing something. This is where I want to get even more practical and emphasize the importance of shifting some of how our learners are trying to learn. Make It Stick came out about 3 years ago, 3 cognitive psychologists. They wanted to write a book about how people learn that was practical, and that was not just about the classroom. It was also about if I had to learn a skill on the job. And it's a very well-written, easily understandable book, and part of what they talk about is how we need to work the information. Because the brain prioritizes where we put our focus. Our brain prioritizes what we do with our time and what we are paying attention to. And a key piece, one of the biggest takeaways from this book for me, is that we are, as human beings, exposed to information all day long. And if we don't do something with the information very soon after seeing it, hearing it, talking about it, we begin to forget. Because part of that attention that I mentioned earlier is how soon we do something with the information once we're exposed to it. And how often, by a show of hands, have folks here been in a class, been in a work training, and they hear something, and you even say to yourself, oh yeah, I won't forget that. And 2 days later, 3 days later, at least some of it's gone. Anybody? Okay. So what we need to do if we want to be effective and efficient with learning and memory is as soon as we can, after we're exposed to the information, is to do something with it. Because what that does, working the information, the very first thing it does is it interrupts the process of forgetting. It interrupts the process of forgetting. So I am a big fan, when earlier we said use 15 minutes, is in that 15 minutes, after I leave that meeting, after I leave that class, is what were the big ideas or takeaways today? What are the things that are most important for me to spend some time thinking more about? And if I was going to explain some of this in my own words to somebody who wasn't here, how would I explain it? I'm going to talk momentarily about how to do this when reading and how to do it when taking notes. Okay? So, assigned reading. All of your learners have assigned reading. If I had a video watching your learners read, what might be some of the behaviors I see them doing while the book is out? What might I notice? What are some examples?
Playing with diddling or...
Playing, diddling, fiddling. What else? What might I notice they're doing? What might you do? Say it again?
Using their phone.
Using their phone. So the book is open, but the phone is out. Okay? Any others? Falling asleep.
I was going to say, it's on the picture, it's flopping around on the book.
Flopping around in the book. Okay? Are there any highlighters in the room? Highlight, highlight, highlight. Are there any skimmers in the room? It's like, well, okay, I kind of got it. Let's go to the back. Yes? Any skimmers? Okay. By a show of hands, again, it's a safe place. It's okay. Who does this happen to? You're reading a chapter, you're reading an article, and that's a work article or a magazine article. You close after the last page and you say, I have no idea what I even just read. Anybody? Okay. And if you have to know that information, then what do you have to do? Read it again. And if I approach it the same way, and then I don't do anything with the information, and I needed that for maybe a week later, then what do I have to do? Read it again. What a massive waste of time. So what I'm going to show you is a way to read something once and get out of it what you need. So the first thing is we're reading to try to make meaning, not to just get the reading done. Every opportunity we have when we're reading is to make new meaning. So the first thing I do is read the headings. Often a reader will skip that. Figure that's not important. We talked about history earlier. Okay, let's say the heading says the War of 1812 begins. So before I read another word, I ask myself some questions just based upon the heading. What might be some questions that might pop up for me when I see the heading, the War of 1812 begins?
Who was fighting?
Who was fighting in the war? Why did the war start? When did it start?
How long did it last?
How long did it last? Great. That took us 10 seconds. It turns on the part of the brain that's going to want to go look for those answers. Then we start reading. We read a paragraph, maybe two, maybe a page based upon the density or the complexity of the material, and then we stop. Why do we stop? Because what we don't want to do is get to the last page, close it, and say, I have no idea what I just read. We stop to try to summarize what we just read. So if I was going to explain to my partner, my kid, my colleague, somebody who didn't read it, if I was going to say, here are the highlights of what I just read. If I can't explain that, why read another word? It might be that I was distracted, so let's put that aside, any distractions, and let's read it again with the intent of making meaning. And then if I can explain it, great. Now, read another chunk. Stop. Explain it. And once I've finished, go back and work any of the examples. Because often when we're assigned a reading, somebody says, well, they didn't tell me to do this practice example. Or in the back of the book, the back of the chapter, it will say, topics for discussion. Well, they didn't assign that, so I'm not going to do it. But that is the best opportunity to interrupt the forgetting and to test our understanding, because those questions were meant to be what we were supposed to get out of the reading. And at first, it could be, this sounds like a lot of work and a lot of time. I tell you that if somebody who reads a lot, is given a lot of assigned reading, does this consistently, 3 weeks is the way they read, it becomes the new way they do it. It becomes the new normal. And they're often surprised at how much they actually remember. My daughter, I talked to her about this, and I talked about annotating. And the annotating is writing things in the column. And I'm going to talk momentarily about cues and using that to our advantage as a learner. Attending to the cues. So when reading, has this ever happened to you? You're really paying attention. You're reading and your mind says, oh, that reminds me of. Does that ever happen? Okay. What does the average reader do with, oh, that reminds me of? Nothing. They ignore it because, no, I had to get the reading done. The oh, that reminds me of is the brain's attempt to make meaning, because what it's doing is taking this new information and trying to connect it to something I already remember, understand, or experienced. And it doesn't matter what that is. You write down those cues. It could be I'm in the middle of reading and my brain says, that reminds me of that Stranger Things character. It doesn't matter if you wrote down Stranger Things in the margin and you look over his reading and say, Stranger Things? Why? It doesn't matter. All that matters is that it helps your brain make that connection. So you write down the cues as you go along, and they're triggers for memory. And it creates those neural pathways. Same thing with note-taking. It's called a Cornell note-taking approach. And it's just another way. Because for many people, the way they take notes is they just write down what's being said to them. There's still room for that. It's still important. But in a Cornell approach, you leave room on the left-hand side of the page for the cues. You're in class, and Mr. Wallace says something, and I say, that reminds me of, and I write that down right in the margin. When I finish class, and I've got the cues, and I've written down everything that I think was important, take a few minutes, as soon as I can, to open that notebook back up and say, if I had to explain to somebody who wasn't here what the big ideas were, what are those big ideas? It's another swipe to interrupt the forgetting, and it gives me a sense of what I understand, but maybe there are some pieces I don't understand. And then I can go back to Mr. Wallace, or I can go back into the readings, or I can talk with my friend and try to do another swipe and get that understanding, get that cleared up. I'm also a big fan of mind mapping. If you're not familiar with mind mapping, the idea is that there's no structure to it, and it's all about helping to make a visual representation of the connections. And this can work with any subject. So the learner can take a piece of paper, they can go up to a whiteboard, they can use their computer programs that are free that allow you to do this. You say, okay, I'm in a biology class, for example, and we're learning about enzymes. Throw enzymes right up in the middle of the page or the screen. What can I remember about enzymes and how are they connected? How are the different facts connected? What works with what? And if I do this every week, if this is my approach to test my understanding, to interrupt the forgetting, then when it comes to the night before the biology exam, I don't need to study everything. I barely have to put any time in at all, because all I have to do is focus on the 10% that I wasn't able to replicate consistently, and then get a good night's sleep. Another piece that I think is underutilized is learning in groups. Learning in groups. But to be really specific of how I do it. Typically what happens is a bunch of people will get together and say, hey, let's study together. And they're friends, and they get into the room, and what happens? No studying is actually going on, right? They're talking about what they did last weekend, they're talking about so-and-so, they're talking about what they're doing the next weekend. This has far clearer purpose, is getting together with 2 or 3 other learners from the class. Doesn't have to be somebody I like. It's somebody who's going to be available at the same time I am, every single week. And what we do is we pick the time and location, and we set a goal. Right? We need to be able to explain why the War of 1812 happened, who was involved, what led to the end of the war. So here's what I'm going to do. You're in my group, and you're going to be teaching us what led up to the war. You're in the group, and you're going to be teaching us what the major battles were in the war, and you're going to walk us through how the war came to resolution. That's what you practice, and you get together and you teach it to each other. And that allows you to get through the illusion of knowing. That idea that it looked familiar, so I must know it. Until you try to explain it to somebody, I don't know if I know it. And this is a fantastic way to use time on task in a very efficient way, in an active way that allows the person to make the connections, have the aha moments, and remember it. What's great about 2018 is if you can't physically get in the same place, you can do a Google Hangout or some other form of live connection. Okay? It's great in Maine when it's snowing out, right? It's a great way to use that opportunity for social learning. So with all this, as a parent, many of you are here because you're parents. As a parent, what can I do to foster this? From some of the comments and looks on your faces I've gone through, I think you already have some good ideas. I think you already know some of what you can do. One of the first things you can do is help establish the learning place or places with and for your student. That for some of us, we don't have separate rooms. We can't go to a coffee shop. Okay, so where at home, if it's going to be at home, where at home is this going to take place, and how can we all as a family work together to make sure that that time is non-distracted, uninterrupted time? Maybe it says some time after school at the school where I can arrange where there's a room where my student can meet with 3 other students and practice the math, practice teaching each other concepts, because they associate school with learning. Try to expect that single tasking whenever you can. Is encourage them, you're going to get this done faster and get more out of it if you just do one thing. And again, the family buy-in is important. My older daughter has taken over one of our rooms on the first floor where her books are everywhere. My younger daughter is not very happy. Says, why can't she go up in her room? And we explain, in her room, she thinks about doing lots of other things other than studying. And I say, just like when you go up and you play ukulele. And she said, oh yeah, I can relate to that. The social learning, provide an audience. This is not put on a show for me or impress me. It's be an active player in their learning. So providing an audience could be asking them to explain a concept. Okay? I just studied, great. Take the next 2 minutes and explain something to me that I've never heard before. Something from what you just read or something from what your teacher taught you today. Explain it to me. Help make connections between ideas. When they're talking about it, say, well, what else does that relate to? Was there another reading that you've ever done that's kind of like this, but maybe it's not like this? What are some similarities and differences? Help them make the connections. And have them summarize chunks of reading. If they say, I have to go read a chapter. Okay, how about if you go read 2 pages and then come back and we'll spend 1 minute and you'll explain those 2 pages to me. And then you'll read the next. And then we'll look for the connections. Flashcards, if you're going to use them interactively. That so often I see the approach to learning is really studying and trying to memorize, which doesn't have as much value as making connections. And this is what I see. I see it at every level. I'll walk by and I'll see the learner with a stack of flashcards. And I can see them staring at the same one for a long time. And you can tell, no, I don't have it, I don't have it. They flip it over, oh yeah, I have it. No, you don't. What you did is you just fooled yourself into thinking you're going to remember that. Has that ever happened to anybody, by the way? Okay, thank you very much. So instead, you say, great, you have some flashcards? Let's do it. Give me the flashcards. And we will go through, and I will ask the questions. And also, instead of it just being, give me the answer, say, okay, so what other cards is that related to? Just like building a mind map, so they can see the connections. The more they can see the connections, the more they're going to remember. How we ask the questions is also very important. Closed-ended questions don't give us as much value. Open-ended questions. And it's just a little shift that can make all the difference in the world. Are your classes going well? What's the typical answer we get? Yep. Yep. How about, okay, so what are you learning about this week? Are you ready for the exam on Thursday? Yep. Okay, talk to me about what's going to be in the exam. Do you understand this concept? Yeah. Okay. All right. In your own words, teach this concept to me. Take a few minutes and teach it to me. Okay. How are your ukulele lessons going? Fine. Okay. Okay. Show me something you weren't able to do a couple weeks ago that you can do now. Because the observations you make can either be praising the process or the characteristics. And that either fosters a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. To foster a fixed mindset, you want to praise the process that you see. You worked really hard on that. I see the effort. The way you approached that was really effective. You stayed focused for an entire hour. That's great. I could see you were struggling, but you kept working at it. You know what? You got this on the last exam. This time you got 5 points higher. If you praise characteristics, you're praising things that some people think I either have it or I don't. You are so smart. You are so talented. You get the best grades. Because if they believe that characteristics are I either have them or I don't, that's fixed. Focus, you want to praise the learning, focus on the process. And take that not yet perspective. Chemistry, ukulele. You know what? You stuck with it. I watched you stick with it, even though it was frustrating. You know, 2 weeks ago, you would not have been able to explain that chemistry concept to me. Now you can. You know, you read for an entire hour. That's fantastic. You just played that stanza from memory. You weren't even looking at the music sheet. You were not able to do that 3 weeks ago. And what Dweck said is that this process praise creates the kid who's hardy, resilient, and builds their confidence. So, the growth mindset, it builds confidence, it builds emotional intelligence. And when it comes to learning, it involves single tasking, attention, and doing something with the information. Work it, use it, teach it. And the not yet approach, as opposed to the now approach, allows us to celebrate those incremental steps and successes and build in the belief that if I couldn't do it before, I will be able to do it. Because learning is lifelong. We can take these approaches our entire life, no matter what it is that we want or need to learn. So some of the resources here, Make It Stick, Mindset, and there's a Mindset toolkit with some activities. And there's my email. I did want to point out that there's a great book that just came out that's written to students. It's probably at about high school level. And it's called Teach Yourself How to Learn. It pulls a lot of this together and speaks to the learner to say, if you take these approaches, you're going to learn more and you're going to do better. I'm going to leave that up, knowing that you'll be able to get this, but I'll leave that up for now. And I wanted to see if we have any questions. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about, if you could talk a little.
Okay. How do you talk with kids about the difference between having a fixed mindset and choosing priorities, things you can do and things you're going to choose not to do?
Mm-hmm. I would say it depends on the age of the child. I think what's more important is the way we talk and the way we reinforce. Because there's a difference between trying to explain a concept and having the child experience our reaction. And that's where I think the focus on the process praise is key. And so I'll take my daughter, for example, the older one who said, I can't do chemistry. She has given me evidence, even though she didn't mean to, that she can overcome when she faces challenge. She's done so with swimming, she's done so with field hockey, she's done so with some of her other subjects. And I look for those opportunities to say, I saw that that was hard for you. And you were able to do it. That's fantastic. And I am confident she's going to get to that point where she is ready to put aside the fictitious belief that she can't do chemistry. So I think the main focus is not so much explaining mindset, it's more about how we respond to the behaviors and the statements that we see in the kids. Others?
You mentioned meaning making a couple times in the process. What is that for you, and how does that support growth mindset?
Sure. So for me, meaning making is that I am able to relate something that lots of people are exposed to, but I'm able to relate it in a way that connects to my life, and it connects to my beliefs, and it connects to my goals. So meaning making, from my perspective, goes beyond understanding, because I can understand a concept and I can explain that concept to you, but it doesn't mean that it holds a lot of weight or purpose for me. So the meaning making is that I am connecting it to something that I truly am invested in. And any opportunity we can help a student make meaning and connection in that way helps them to build their investment in striving to that next level and getting over some of the confusion, maybe initial confusion, and those are ways to foster the growth mindset. Does that answer your?
It does. I'm just really curious how to support that process.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of apathy and
sure.
Especially in the learning environment. So.
Mm-hmm. I think any time that they can see a personal connection, so to say, what does this story remind you of? How did this character connect to somebody else in your life? Getting them beyond the initial exposure to it and having them do something with it. And in this case, the doing something with it is actively trying to relate it to my own life. It can be challenging. Don't want to make it sound too easy, but I think that's the direction we go in when it comes to meaning making. Others?
My English is not good, but let me try. Children normally like playing games and or something else. So how can we connect them to like a school activity? Like my son, he just got to school, but normally like to play games or something. I say stop playing, just do your homework or something else. So normally, how can I connect with him the school activity or something like that? That's my question.
I think it's a wonderful question. My initial response is, if I see that there is a learner that enjoys games, is how do I make the learning into a game? Because if what they perceive is, I have my games and then I have to study, the idea of them wanting to learn is not having fun and playing games. So when I gave examples of have them explain concepts, you could make a game out of that, where each night you can give them a certain number of points of how well they were able to explain a concept, that they can build up the points. Or if they're learning in groups, they could vote which of them explained it best this time around, and the next time it's who improved the most of the group. So coming up with ways that you can have the learning become a game in itself. Storytelling is often experienced by children as games. So tell me the story about what you were learning in school today. That can become a game, something they look forward to at night, is having an audience and telling the story of what they've been exposed to. Does that help with your question? Okay. Others?
My question is about a student who loses just motivation. How can you help him or her?
I think the first step is to determine why they lost motivation. Have them talk about a difference between what you see now and what you saw before. So instead of just saying, I notice you've lost motivation, you can say, I notice that you're spending less time on your schoolwork now than you were a few months ago. Talk to me about that. That's an open-ended question. Talk to me about that. Often the lack of motivation is that they're frustrated with the learning process. And I think students or learners with a fixed mindset are far more likely to lose motivation because if they can't do it well now, they don't believe they can do it well at all. So getting a sense of why they are spending less time or seem to be less motivated, but asking open questions can give you a sense of what's going on for them, and that gives you an action of what to do and reinforcing for them that I've seen you struggle in the past and do better, and you can do that here. Go ahead.
So as someone who graduated high school only 6 years ago, pretty recently, what was a huge issue for me, I was in a fixed mindset, you could say, during high school and college, especially growing up with social media. Kids, all we see is the results. So as educators, as parents, how can we get kids to believe that growth mindset is a reality for them when they have so much other things telling them that it's not true?
So I know that there's been research on kids who spend high amount of time on social media have higher levels of depression, anxiety, performance issues, because often what you see on social media is a person at their best, right? They want to share how well they can do something. So instead of saying to them, social media is something you should spend less time with, as an educator or a parent, I would ask, how long do you think it took them to get to the point where they can sing that song that way, or they can skateboard down the railing that way? How long do you think it took them? And what do you think they did when they fell the first time they tried to skateboard down the railing? To get them to somehow recognize that most of what they see out there is not inborn talent that's a now focus, where all of a sudden they've never skateboarded and they can skateboard downstairs and go up in the air for what seems like physics-defying times. And to say, boy, I can only imagine the number of hours they put in, the amount of practice they put in order to get to that point. What would be the type of thing you'd like to be able to do even better than you do now? And how much practice are you putting in? I know you can do it because I've seen you improve from here to here. So I think pointing out what they perceive as the ideal and something that is based upon you either have the talent or you don't, and introduce the idea of incremental improvement and practice and hard work and facing failure and working through obstacles, those can be opportunities. Those can be opportunities. So interjecting some different thought about what they're already going to be looking at. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, I know how many of you have already very busy days and have a very busy evening in front of you, so I appreciate you taking the time. I hope there's something of value, a takeaway for you, and I hope you do something with the information and talk with others about it. So thank you for your time.
There is one more question. I'm sorry. Yes, Sandra.
Thank you very much. I was a parent. My children all graduated from high school, so I wish that I know all these tips while they were at school. I was telling my boss this morning that when I read the slides, it was really helpful, and I will share with my community the back meetings that I do. I already take a permission if I can do. My boss, I already asked her, and thank you very much. It's really helpful, and I encourage my community to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Video. So thank you very much for coming, and Paul did an awesome job. Give him a big round of applause. Thank you.
Good evening. The workshop was just terrific. Paul Dexter presented a very clear outline of useful tools that parents can use, or even teachers can use, working with children. I am a parent here in Portland schools, and this is very heads-up thinking that I know that I can go home now and apply and share with my wife, for that matter, as we encourage our kids to get excited about learning and keeping an open mind to what failure is and obstacles are, and I look forward to reviewing my notes and actually going back to the mindset book and getting into that. I'm excited about this whole concept, and also look forward to the next workshop that Parent University will be offering. So thank you.
It was really great coming to the Parent University session tonight because it was really well presented, and I am leaving feeling like I have a lot of things to think about and a lot of things, very specific things to talk with my kids about what it takes to learn and read and remember what you read. So I'm excited about going home to talk to them about it.